episode of Motivating Monday. Today we're continuing on into a series of pearls from Proverbs. Certainly there's a lot of things that we can learn from the book of Proverbs itself. Did you know that the book of Proverbs also talks about disciplining your children and how we can go about doing it and why we should be doing it? While going through this, I also relate the points to church discipline and how the points are actually very similar. So without further ado, let's go into the passages that talks about disciplining our children. Let's first turn to Proverbs chapter 13, verse 24. It reads, "He that spareth his rod hateth his son, but he that loveth him chasteneth him betimes." There are other verses that also talks about it. In Proverbs chapter 22, verse 15, "Foolishness is bound in the heart of a child, but the rod of correction shall drive it far from him." In Proverbs chapter 23, verse 13, "Withhold not correction from the child, for if thou beatest him with the rod, he shall not die." In continuing in verse 14, "Thou shalt beat him with the rod, and shalt deliver his soul from hell." We continue on reading. In Proverbs 29 verse 15, "The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself bringeth his mother to shame." And also in verse 17, "Correct thy son, and he shall give thee rest. Yea, he shall give delight unto thy soul." From here we can see that there is a plethora of verses that actually talks about disciplining our children. And if I were to summarize all these verses into two parts. One, we talk about the decision to chasten the child and also to spare the child instead. So we can see some keywords when we talk about chastening. First, we see the keyword love. Compared to, if I choose to spare a child, the keyword is hate. We'll talk more about that later. In chastening, we also see the word wisdom. But in spareth, we see that the destination is to hell. In chastening, we see that it brings the parents to be proud. But in spareth, the parents will have shame. In chastening, we see that the parents will have rest or peace. But in spareth, we see the parents will have unrest. So you see a lot of positive points in relating to carrying out disciplining to your children, but a lot of negative points if you so choose not to have exact discipline onto your children. So from these verses, we will have three main key points to the lesson. The first point talks about love. The key word is love. So in the earlier verses, we read that the discipline of the children should come from the right motive, which is through love. If you love your child, you will discipline your children. But if you choose not to discipline your children, the Bible says, or the book of Proverbs specifically says, that you hate your child. Which is a very strong word in my opinion. Some parents in modern times feel that because I love my child, I don't have the heart to discipline my child, even though he is acting unruly. However, as what I said earlier, this is not true love. True love seeks to correct if the other party has gone astray. What about for brethren who decide to walk disorderly in the church, that you know that they are not walking in the light? Do we also carry out church discipline on the brethren? If we do not do so, is it because we do not have the right motive? Is it because we do not love our brethren enough to carry out church discipline? Or do we feel that if we were to carry out church discipline, the brethren would not come to church anymore? Certainly there's a point for us to think about. So that was our first point about love, that discipline should come from the right motive, which is about love. Second, when it comes to carrying out discipline on our children, the second keyword is limit. Truly, there is a time limit in which we can correct our children, because there will be a time when our children will no longer be called children, they will be adults. At that time, sad to say, it may be too late to conduct parental discipline. So parents, the only time for us to carry out those verses in Proverbs is now, when our child is still young. Because, like a bonsai tree, if we do not correct the way it grows, when the branches are still soft, by the time it hardens and grows bigger, you cannot correct them anymore, not without breaking the branches. So, there is a time limit in which we can conduct our parental discipline on our children. So we talk about the two keywords, love and limit. Finally, I want to talk about the last point, which is about the landing place, which was specifically mentioned in the earlier verses. That disciplining our children is actually a small punishment to pay, and our ultimate destination is to direct them towards heaven and to avoid the greater punishment. And what is this greater punishment? As I mentioned, one of the keywords when we talk about sparing is the destination is hell. We want to avoid our children from going to hell. So by having all this small punishment, this discipline, having all this small punishment, it helps to save their soul away from the final punishment, which is hell. Similar to the concept of disfellowship, for disfellowshipping brethren who choose to remain in error. If the church were to carry out the proper church discipline to disfellowship a brethren who choose to walk disorderly, by making them lose the fellowship, they will lose the joy of the connection they had with the brethren before, and they will want to return to God and the church by leaving the error of their ways. This, in relation to what I mentioned earlier, is a small punishment to pay to help them avoid the greater punishment. If the church were to carry out church discipline on the brethren, on the brethren who choose to walk disorderly, when they lose the connection that they have, in order to get it back, this is the chance for them to think back on their ways and decide to leave the error of their ways and come back to the church. And since this is already mandated by God, that this is the way to get our brethren back, the church has the right, has the duty to carry out church discipline on brethren who decide to walk disorderly. So with that, we summarize the lesson into 3 points: love, limit, and landing place. Love, disciplining, should come from the right motive, which is love. Limit, there is a time limit for parents to carry out their duty for disciplining children. And last is the landing place, that our ultimate goal is to get them into the right destination, which is heaven. And if we choose not to carry out discipline on our children, their final landing place will probably be hell. Of course, even said so, it does not mean that if we were to carry out disciplining on our children, that we guarantee them a pathway to heaven, that they will grow up as faithful children. There is no guarantee. But certainly, if we choose not to do it, it will be worse off than if they'll be worse off than actually carrying out discipline. If we choose not to do it, then we have already placed their name into the road that goes to hell. And certainly as parents, we will not want to do that. So with that, I thank you for your time and your attention for this lesson, and I hope that that you have gained something out of this. Perhaps you do not have kids now, but definitely in the future, if you have children, the concept that you learn from these few verses, that you can actually apply it when you decide to discipline your children. And even if you do not have children, the concept is also similar to how the church should carry out church discipline on brethren who decide to walk disorderly with us. And this is already written by Paul in the book of 1 Corinthians. So with that, I thank you for your time, and we'll see you next week. Thank you.